do anytime I'm speaking to a group of people in the education profession, I want to begin by thanking you. Right now, the messages that you hear are largely not one of thanks and praise, so I have to take every opportunity I can to say thank you. You've chosen the most important profession in our country and in our world. Many people say that they want to change the world. Many people say that they want to make a difference. You're the ones that are putting action, your thoughts, your hearts, and your minds behind those words. You're the ones that are bringing those words to life, and for that, I thank you. My second task tonight is to introduce our speaker. Diane Sweeney is a lead consultant for Spark Innovation, a consulting firm specializing in coaching, literacy, and leadership. We've had the privilege of working with Diane for the last about year and a half, and our work with her has been nothing short of transformational. Diane supports teachers, coaches, principals, and district leaders in the development of a student-centered approach for instructional coaching and professional development. She's also served as a teacher, literacy coach, and university professor. She currently lives with her family in Denver, Colorado, and as I've expressed, our work with her has been nothing short of transformational, and I know you'll come away from this evening feeling the same way. So we're very blessed, and we're very thankful to have her, and if you could please, on this very cold night, give a warm welcome to Diane Sweeney.
And chilly in Denver, too, so
Not a shot.
it's good to be here. You know, I thought this is an opportunity because there's so much in the world of instructional coaching that isn't working and that is getting in the way of student learning. And so I oftentimes feel like I'm on sort of a mission to bring back our hope in providing support to teachers. And thank you. Do I need that? Okay. Oh, and for the recording. Where do I put this thing? I'm gonna hold it. Really, I believe in sort of no, this is good, thanks. I believe in the power of support in a way that is not what it typically looks like. And I say that from a person who's been there, who's learned some of these things, maybe not the easy way. My work really in the area of coaching started before coaching was a thing. It started in Denver Public Schools. I was in a school that was a Title I school, an elementary school. Well, we were just kind of moving in the direction of becoming a Title I school. We had really high-need student population, 100% free and reduced lunch. I didn't have to take lunch count. We just knew. We had a very innovative principal who was really dedicated. In fact, she just retired after, I think, it was going on about 18 or 19 years in the school, committed to the kids that we served. And we decided, we sort of had heard of this idea of, wow, there may be a place to provide support in the classroom to teachers while they're teaching. And this was 1994-ish, and that was a radical idea. And I said, sign me up, because I felt as if I had gone to the UC Irvine for my teaching degree, and I felt like I was ready. It's a pretty good program. I felt like I had learned what I had to learn to be a teacher. And then I got kind of that harsh reality as a teacher, like, this isn't quite as easy as I thought it was going to be. I need help with this. And so when we had the opportunity of providing this idea, this sort of idea that was just starting to, the seed was just being planted, to work with teachers in classrooms, I thought, that's great. That's what I want to do. So there I went, and I turned from teacher to literacy coach. And I'd been a 4th and a 5th grade teacher, and I realized one day when I was waiting for a train, I remember this day vividly, and I remember having this realization that, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to coach K-5. I'm going to have to coach grades I've never taught before, grades that I had very little familiarity. And that was my first OMG moment of, how am I going to do this? So the way I went about it is I decided, well, I must have been a pretty good teacher if I got hired to do this. So I'm just going to try to turn everybody into me. That's when you laugh. Cue the laughter. I thought I would just essentially get people to teach the way I taught. And you know what happened is I ended up with some people who I partnered quite well with. I can still to this day tell you who those folks were. And I had some people who wanted nothing to do with me. I can still tell you to this day who those people were. And I essentially, to put it really bluntly, had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea how to partner with teachers to move their thinking forward, to move student learning forward, and to do all the things that I wanted to do. So I had a conversation with a colleague, and I decided I'm going to put all my eggs in the basket of really good PE. I'm going to just deliver. I'm going to create all kinds of great ways for people to collaborate. And I remember a conversation I had with a friend from Denver Public Schools, and she said, you know, Diane, I think all those ideas are great. I had study groups going, I had learning labs going, I had all this stuff going. She said, those are all great ideas, but what about the kids? And that's when I realized, it was kind of a gut check actually. I thought, here I am a coach. Here I am designing opportunities for teachers. But very little actually, I would honestly say probably slim to none of my thinking had anything to do with kids. So I was thinking about learning for teachers in a vacuum. I was thinking, I'll get them together, we'll do these cool things, and they'll walk away and they'll transfer that, and kids' learning will increase. And that, in a nutshell, is the problem with coaching, I think, on a national level. The problem is we have a trickle-down theory with instructional coaching in general. We think if we get people to do these things, and you can fill in the blank on what the things are, it's all the things that are swirling around us. We get people to do these things, then student learning will get better. We get people to differentiate, and student learning will get better. We get people to think about how to reach ELL students, it'll increase. But it's a really bad assumption to make, because we have years and years and years of evidence that, you know, actually very little evidence that it's made any difference at all. So what I decided after that conversation is I have to start thinking a heck of a lot more about kids. And I have to start figuring out how to design my work so I know that kids' learning is getting better. And that's what led to my book, the book Student-Centered Coaching. Essentially what that is it's just really the story of this moving in the direction by creating tools and structures and systems and ways to go about my work as a coach that really ensured that kids' learning got better, that kids' learning was impacted, that we made a difference for kids at all in our work. So these are the things I landed on. And this is the big idea that sort of grounds student-centered coaching. And I was figuring I would just share kind of some of the core practices with you guys tonight and then see what questions you have. So the first thing we've already talked about, coaching can be absolutely gauged and geared around increasing student learning. Instructional coaching can be geared around increasing student learning. And that I said it twice because it is a radical idea. Because typically it is geared all around using certain instructional practices. It's almost always solely geared around instruction with this assumption that then good instruction will trickle down to kids' learning. So we can flip that. Another big part of the kind of philosophy that drives my work is partnership. I find that I have to work with people to meet their goals, or else everything explodes in my face. And I've learned the hard way, trying to sort of make people do things and be subtle and use certain special questioning techniques. I've learned that stuff tends to backfire if it's not really based on an absolute partnership. And then another big idea that's also kind of a little bit different than sometimes what we hear is that I see coaching as being not necessarily something certain people in a school do or something we assign to certain people to do who need it. But I see coaching as being a matter of if, in terms of, or excuse me, it is not, oh my gosh, I'm goofy. It is not a matter of if. It's not a matter of should I participate? Am I a teacher who needs this? It's a matter of when, which means if we're gearing coaching around student outcomes, well then everybody is coached. And that gets to a really big point about what it is not. So I'm going to jump ahead because I want to clarify this point. Because again, this is something that I'm noticing out in the field, out in educational circles, that there's this temptation to use coaching to fix people. There's a temptation to think about coaching as being our sort of way we address problems in classrooms, as the way that we go about concerns we have in terms of instruction. And what ends up happening is you have a coach or an instructional coach, you have a literacy coach, a math coach, who are sort of put in a pretty difficult position, because the position they're put in is to say, I need to get you to do these things. I need to make you do these things. You've been deemed unacceptably teaching and not doing things the way you should be doing them, so I'm the person who has to fix you. And that, again, is a way that we really backfire and kind of sabotage coaching. So we actually think a lot more about it as partnership and a lot less about it as a deficit approach towards teachers. The other thing that I think is important to name is that it's so fascinating to me to see how easily we separate instruction from learning. And so we never talk about instruction. When we're in our coaching conversations, we never talk about instruction without talking about learning. And it seems like such a no-brainer to say, well, of course we focus on learning in association with instruction. But if you think about something like, I'm going to toss out lesson study as an example. There are models where we sit down and we plan collaboratively, and then we teach, and then we plan collaboratively again. And the thing about lesson study that's so interesting is we infuse that partnership. We pull in this thinking about how do the kids respond to the instruction before we actually decide if that instruction made sense or not. Whereas, so that's an example of kind of a place where it's paired, but then there's a lot of examples of times when we just sit there, we plan lessons together, or we plan lessons solo, we go teach them, and then that's it. That's it. Then we move on to the next lesson the next day. So we never want to we always want to pair teaching and learning. And in a second, when I share some of the practices we use, it'll make sense, I think, because you'll see that it's a very natural pairing, but it's an unnatural thing that we tend to separate those two things. Then the other thing I think that's important is just this idea that only certain teachers should be coached is something that I tend to run up against a lot in my work. I work actually in schools and districts that are across the globe, pretty much. I've worked in schools that are in Asia, in India, all throughout the US, and the temptation is so there by principals, typically, or school leaders of some, in general. They're concerned about instruction, they're concerned about student learning, and so what they want to do, again, is they want to apply coaching to certain people, and this is how it looks, is we essentially have two buckets in our minds. We think about who are the people in my building who are effective, and who are the people who are less effective, and I'm going to put the coaching over there. They're going to be the ones who work with those folks. And if you've been a coach, who's a coach right now in buildings? If you've been a coach and you've ever been put in a position to do that work, to work in that way, you can tell what is the biggest problem? Resistance. Teachers push back. And one of my best stories, favorite stories from my work, one of my worst days as an educator, is I was working on a Navajo reservation, and I was early on as a coach. I was kind of a coach consultant at the time in literacy, and a colleague and I would fly a little 9-seater airplane from Denver down to Cortez, and We were out, you know, if you saw Thelma and Louise, you know, they're driving through, we were in Thelma and Louise territory. It's a beautiful place, very, very rural. And a school with a lot of needs. A school with needs that were verging on just lots of kids' needs not being met, let's just say. And I remember getting there, and the principal was lovely, and he came with a little piece of paper and some names, and he said to my colleague and I, he said, Leanna and Diane, these are my folks that I want you to work with. He gave me a name of 6 or 7 people, a list of 6 or 7 people. And we took the list, and we were just happy to have somewhere to start because we didn't know what we were doing. And we said, okay, we'll work with these people. And we couldn't understand why every time we'd show up at the school, which was about monthly, the folks wouldn't remember our names. We were starting to think, why doesn't anybody, they wouldn't be in their classrooms, they wouldn't be ready for us, they wouldn't have done anything that we had discussed between visits. And then it really came to a head when we arrived, and the principal kind of sheepishly came out of his office to greet us, and he said, well, guys, I have some news. Everyone you're working with is called in sick. They called in sick. We were there for 2 days. They called in sick for 2 days. The people we were working with called in sick. So it was a sick out, a coaching sick out. And we had a lot of time because our flight out wasn't for 2 more days. So we sat there. We thought about what's our work? How is our work not working? What are we doing here that's so flawed? And it took us a while to figure out. I think we were a little slow at the time. But we realized with some pretty interesting reflection and time to chat, we realized that the list of people that he had given us, I guess I had just assumed they were willing and able and interested and volunteered. But it wasn't the case. The list of people he gave us were the people who were barely hanging on as teachers in the building. The people who probably would have been the least best people to work, the least effective partnerships for a coach to work with. So we had to change it up, and we decided, we're going to have to then do our work with folks who are interested. We can't continue on this way. And we rebuilt, and it was a learning experience, but this is what I learned from it. I learned that just doesn't work. It doesn't work to assign coaching to certain people. It doesn't work to say, you need this help, so you have to work with a coach. So what do we do? So in the simplest terms, we've created a model for coaching, as I've said, that's a partnership, that's built on sort of a shared vision, a shared willingness, that's hopefully something that is geared towards anybody in the school, not just certain people in a school. And when we're partnering and working with these folks, we frame our work around a gap. There's a gap that exists in all learning. And it's the gap between what we want the kids to do, know, understand, the depth of knowledge, all of those things. That gap between what they know and what they're doing currently. So we capitalize on that gap in coaching, and that's essentially where we live. We live between, as coaches, we live between where are kids right now, where are they right now as learners, and where do they need to be? And we collaborate and we partner with teachers to figure that out. And that's where I'm happiest as a coach. And as somebody said today in Madison who I was working with, it's common sense. That's what we do as coaches. So it's such a relief to slough off this feeling of, I've got to make you do stuff. I've got to make you teach like I did. Instead, we problem solve. We analyze. We think together. We dig deep into what kids are doing right now and what they need to do. So some of the kind of familiar terms in a school of ed that are probably going to ring true to you, one is a big anchor for our work is formative assessment. So we are designing and thinking with teachers as coaches constantly about how do we know in every lesson, through every lesson, what kids know in relationship to what you're teaching. So let's imagine the learning target. I'm going to toss one out that I worked with a teacher on this week. We were working on recognizing text structure when reading informational text. Okay? 4th grade. That's the goal. That's what we're working towards. And so what we did is we got the kids engaged in some learning. They looked at some nonfiction books. They figured out what is the text structure. And we were thinking about that gap. So we were trying to think, okay, how are they doing in relationship to how they need to be doing? So we formatively assessed in partnership together in the classroom with the kids. And then we had that reference also, which is the what they need to know, which was, what is the standard demand? So we had the standard with us. We had learning targets associated with the standard. We knew precisely what they need to be doing. And lo and behold, as the kids are engaged in learning, as we're watching and engaging with the kids while they're learning, this huge aha presents itself. The aha was, kids are confusing text features, text structure, and topic. They have no idea how text structure helps them as readers. But that's a celebration because now we have work. We have a gap to fill. So that's our partnership. So here I have this opportunity as a coach and as a teacher, with a teacher, to figure out how the heck are we going to get these kiddos to differentiate topic, structure, format, all of these other things. And our wheels started turning, and immediately we had about 15 ideas of lessons we could teach. Lots of ways we could go after this, and that's one example. So we get into this gap, and that's essentially where we live. We live there working in partnership with teachers to figure out how do we get kids to mastery? How do we get kids to know what they need to know and be able to do? And we use 7 core practices. I'm just going to introduce these to you because I don't want to, it's not necessarily an opportunity to teach you how to do these, but the core practices are essentially the way we go about our work. The first core practice that we use is, it's an interesting tweak, again, on how coaching typically looks out in the world. Instructional coaching tends to be geared around getting a teacher to do something. I'm going to do guided reading, or I'm going to do differentiation, or I'm going to engage my kids more. I'm going to use these particular instructional strategies. And instead, we frame all of our work around goals for kids. What's the goal for kids for our coaching cycle? So I'll circle back. The one I'm working with that I just shared was the goal of understanding, the structure of a nonfiction text, to comprehend the text, to understand the text, to get deeper into the text, and using that structure as a reader. That's our goal for coaching, whereas a lot of times it tends to be much more teacher-centered. So our goal for coaching cycles, and I'll share with you what a coaching cycle is as well, is always framed around something we want the kids to do better. So if you think about the language of, I'm coaching a teacher, and the teacher will learn X, that's not student-centered coaching. If you're coaching a teacher and you say, I'm coaching you, or a group of teachers for that matter, and our goal is the students will learn X, then we're student-centered coaching. It's a big fork in the road for me, because if I go down the road of a goal for a teacher, then I've kind of lost that laser light focus I want to have on kids, and I've lost my ability to know where to just be very targeted towards student outcomes. So we always work around goals for kids, and it could be, last week I was in Iowa, and we were working on a goal in a show choir class, of all things. I've never coached in a show choir class, but this is a teacher who had a goal related to that. I wasn't his coach, but I was there helping. It could be related to any content area, any grade level. Our second core practice too is, it makes a lot of sense if you have, if you're working in partnership with a teacher around a goal for kids, then you have to kind of know, what does it look like, again, that gap, what does it look like to reach the goal? What is the demand? What are the demands to get there on students. And so what we do here is our second core practice is we really go after that through learning targets. So we think a lot about things like this example of the text structure. We think about what are all the learning targets. We call them I can statements. What are the things kids can do that kids have to demonstrate they can do to say, I've met the standard, I've mastered that standard. So if it's writing a piece of informational text, there's certain things as learners they have to be able to do. So we work in partnership with teachers to sort of identify or create or name whatever learning targets we need to know for sure what kids are doing. And the folks, the formative assessment gurus like Popham and Dylan Willem and those folks, this is all from them, but essentially we're just taking it and we're putting it into the context of sort of on-the-ground practitioner-based sort of coaching. So it's this idea that you can't formatively assess if you don't know the criteria, right? The learning targets are part of that. So we embed those deeply into our coaching conversations. In fact, almost every coaching conversation circles back to learning targets in some way, because we're always talking about what do they know and what do they need to know, and that's what the need to know is, those learning targets, in order to close that gap. Another big core practice for us, and this is probably the first one I did after that conversation where the teacher said, or where the colleague of mine said, where are the kids in your work? And I realized one of the fastest and easiest way I can get kids into my work is I can get kids into my work. And so I just started using student work in all my conversations. So a classic example of this core practice is that we do a lot of what we call sorting sessions with teachers. So we'll just take a stack of, let's say it could be exit slips from an English class or from a chemistry class, and we'll sort them into piles and say what are trends we're seeing. And we quickly analyze the work that way. And then we decide, okay, so based on what the kids just did, and typically they surprise us, we can't always anticipate what those patterns are going to be. So we like to just keep our minds open, have a stack of Post-its, mark patterns and trends we're seeing, and then think together about what are we going to do instructionally. So then as a result, we co-plan. So we have student evidence, and I want to name this is not data. Data is actually a 4-letter word. Has anybody ever thought about that fact? It's kind of a funny little thing to think about. Data can be viewed by teachers as not very descriptive necessarily, and it's not necessarily that that real sort of descriptive and that close-up look at what kids are doing right now that we need to plan lessons. So we don't typically work from data. I think data is important for other reasons in schools, especially just to monitor and make sure there's no student populations that are falling through the cracks, et cetera. But we use student evidence. So we use things like actual work samples, conference notes. I've seen photos kids take on iPads with notes on them. I mean, you can use, I had a coach with whiteboards, working with whiteboards, and she photocopied the whiteboards and we brought them in and used them. You can use such a rich array of evidence of learning, and that's what we typically use in our coaching conversations. So if you think about that gap I mentioned earlier, if we have kind of where are the kids now, that's how we know where they are, is our student evidence. Where they need to be are those learning targets. And then we co-plan and co-teach to move them where they need to be. So we're just partnering on that in a way that's very much rooted in actual kids learning and kids work. And you can imagine we can't do that without some ongoing work. Because if, for example, this example I've been working with you guys this evening around text structure, you're not going to teach that in a day. If you do, you didn't do a very good job. Actually, I would argue against trying to get that taught and learned in a single day. So we try to work around bigger goals, typically standards-based goals, that are then really demand some ongoing work. So we call those coaching cycles, and we like to organize ourselves by, we have usually, if it's a coaching cycle with an individual, we'll have a weekly planning session where we sit down and we do the sorting session and we plan student work. And then I usually spend a couple days a week in the classroom, not whole days, but a couple sessions a week in the classroom. So I'm sitting there with kids learning how are they doing in relationship to what they need to be doing. And I'm collecting that evidence right alongside teachers. So we have usually about 4 to 6 weeks is how long a coaching cycle lasts. So if you think about it from start to finish, you start with a goal related to kids. So our students will do this thing. Our students will solve multi-step math problems and explain their reasoning. That may be a goal for a coaching cycle. We partner, we meet weekly. I'm in the classroom a few times a week. And then we're essentially done when we feel the students have met the goal. And that usually, if it's a good, beefy goal, that'll take 4 to 6 weeks of partnership. And then if we have kids that don't meet the goal, we've got to figure out what are we going to do about that. So we can think about RTI, we can think about collaborating with special services, we can think about continuing on if we need to, spiraling back. There's lots of options. But we monitor kids across a coaching cycle very carefully so that we know who's met the goal, who hasn't, to what degree, to what level. And so you can see how intentional this partnership is around goals for kids. You can see how this is not your old-fashioned coaching where it's me trying to get you to teach like I did. Instead, we're partnering towards outcomes for kids. It's a big shift. It's actually a really big shift in the coaching world. I'm kind of a rebel in the world of coaching because I just don't have the patience for the hoping and praying that kids are going to learn from what we're doing. So core practice number 5 then is sort of already been suggested, but it's kind of a simple idea that I shouldn't probably, there's kind of 3 ways coaches typically work in classrooms. Typically we either model a lesson, so you watch me teach, and then we'll talk about it. Sometimes we co-teach, where we work in partnership. And then the third option is that I may observe you teach. And then we'll talk about it after as well. So for us, our go-to is co-teaching. So we do a lot of co-teaching of lessons. I didn't necessarily co-teach in the show choir classroom because I don't sing, nor do I know much about it. And so instead, on that case, I worked in partnership with a teacher, and I was collecting evidence that he asked me to collect. So I was really popping around and working with kids to see what they were doing. So co-teaching may not look like 2 of us in front delivering. It could be one person's delivering a lesson, another is sitting with kids and probing. It could be co-conferring. There's a lot of ways we can partner in classrooms. But the co-teaching piece is really when we get at the effective instructional practices, the pedagogy. Because we can't forget that a legacy of a coach has to be effective instruction. It has to be that teachers are teaching well. And so by co-teaching and co-planning, we can sit together and we can figure out how are we going to differentiate, how are we going to group kids, how are we going to get kids engaged in the content, what are ways we can do that. And if you think about all of the demands of teacher evaluation, like the Danielson framework and other frameworks that are out there, Marzano, we embed those things right into our co-planning sessions. So we say, well, if these are what good teaching look like, these indicators, then let's build them into our instruction. So we're increasing student outcomes, but we're also improving instruction right there along with it. So that's something just to point out. Couple more, and then we'll see what questions you guys have. We tend to have I've been in a lot of districts where coaches are precarious positions. In the sense that the superintendent just last week said to me, he walked in a room, I was meeting with his coaches, and he said, do you know how much salary is in this room? I said, yeah, I do. And he has every right to be concerned. It's a line item to some people. And so we find that we have to measure the impact of our work for that reason. And we have tools that we use to do that. Tools that we use that we can say, at the beginning of a coaching cycle, the kids knew this. At the end, they knew this. It's not necessarily It's kind of formative style assessment we're talking about here, but we have some comparative data as a result of our work with teachers. And then we can also say, and these are the practices instructionally, that teachers are now using that maybe they didn't do before. So we try to bottle and capture really evidence of our impact, and for those people like that superintendent, but also for ourselves and for the coaching throughout the school in general. Because there's no better way to get buy-in with coaching than to get results with coaching. So you hear teachers say, I never taught like that before. I've learned so much as a teacher. You also hear, even more importantly, teachers saying, my kids have learned so much. I didn't think they could do that. We work together and now they can. So we measure the impact and we celebrate the impact we're making with kids and teachers a lot. It's a big ethic because, again, this is an outcomes-based model, outcomes on kids, so why wouldn't we share that? And then the last thing is really that my book, Student-Centered Coaching, amazingly enough, is the first book on coaching that was ever considered to be written to an audience of principal as well. And we find that there is a lot of disconnect between principals and coaches. And I went through a phase where I was working as a literacy coach in 4 schools in Denver, and I couldn't believe the difference between how I was able to work with these 4 different principals. And they were all in the same neighborhood, and I'd drive from one to the other, and it was like entering a different continent. It was so different. And so we believe that we really have to help coaches understand how to partner effectively with their principal. And we really have to help principals understand how to deploy a coach, how to take a coach in your building and use it to the greatest possible effect, and how to build a culture in a school that accepts a coach and that actually can't live without a coach. My own kids inherited a principal. Actually, it's funny, she was from Wisconsin. And she wasn't comfortable with coaching. And she didn't know how to deploy the coaches, and they were sort of lost. They were lost in their school, and I was trying to help, and I'm trying to stay out of it because I'm a mom in the school, and that's never a good thing, just get too involved. And what happened is the coaches' positions were cut. And it was because the teacher said, why do we have coaches? They're not necessarily even helping me at all. I don't see the value. So when we had one of those really rough budget meetings, that's what happened. And I don't want to blame that on the principal because it wasn't her fault. It was just simply that they hadn't figured out how to really take advantage of this so precious resource. So here's the thing I'd like to get you guys to think about. When Beth introduced me, she was thinking about, she was talking about how much passion and devotion it takes to be a teacher. And so what I'd love to toss out to you is this question of how could we possibly expect teachers to do that alone? If the job is as big as it is, which we know it is, how could we possibly expect somebody to learn everything they need to know in a place like this, go into a classroom, get a supply list, set up some desks, and be good to go? It's absolutely ridiculous to think about that. And so I cherish coaching. I'm coached, I coach others, and I actually think it is something that everybody in every profession deserves and needs, unless it's some profession that maybe, I don't know, there's probably some examples we could think of, but you catch my drift. This is something that means a lot, and it's underutilized. It's utilized in a lot of cases in ways that are counterproductive, and to me it's just a great loss, because here we have teachers in classrooms working so hard to move kids' learning and working alone. So here's what I'd love for you to think about, and I'm going to just see if this triggers any questions, because it's it's weird for me to talk like this at an audience, so I can't resist getting you guys to reflect for a minute here. I'm wondering if your definition, you came into this room, I guess, for a reason, unless there were just snacks out there and you free books, maybe that's why. But I'm wondering if, just after this little bit of conversation, if your definition of coaching and in terms of instructional coaching has changed. Has your thinking changed at all? And what questions do you have? Because we wanted to save a little time for Q&A. We have a mic because we're recording, so it's not for to hear everybody that we need, but we need to capture your questions on the mic. So would you just do a quick chat with somebody nearby, somebody at your row, and talk about these things? How's your definition of coaching changed? And what questions do you have, if any? How you doing? Before we see if there's questions, I thought I may just see if there's any new thinking. We're chatting over here about the connections to higher ed. You can tell I'm a real practitioner. It's funny, people ask me, is that validated in the research? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. This is, I feel like I'm sort of an interloper on some level at a university setting, because this work comes from the work. This is rooted in rough and tumble, trial and error, making it work. And so this question of what does this look in a K-12 or in a post-secondary setting, and that, in terms of supporting teachers new to the profession, this is a fantasy. Could you imagine if every teacher who came in just knew you're going to be coached? This is what coaching, I'm taking over the world. No, I'm just kidding. This is what coaching is going to look like. We're going to be a part of a collaborative system. You're not going to be alone. And this is what it will look like. We certainly can't make those promises right now because our systems aren't ready to deliver on it. Not at all. Our systems can't deliver on that yet. Some can. Some places can, but not universally. So there's a lot of new, exciting thinking. So what other exciting thinking bubbled up? Anything else? Wonderings or thoughts? And Beth has the mic, or you can just. The mic, I was going to say the mic might make you not want to share.
I have a wondering. I'm not sure if it's the time for it yet. I'll try to speak.
Yeah, a wondering. Any time is good for a wondering.
So mine is a wondering based on your experience, because you've worked with many districts in many different places.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens when you go into a school and you're working with what the teachers want to be working on, because the teachers feel incredible pressure to be mastering a particular program.
Okay.
You know what I'm getting at?
Yep.
And again, this is something that the teacher wants.
Happened to me this week.
It might not be what the teacher really wants.
Yeah.
It's usually not. But when the teacher is feeling that pressure, how do you negotiate that as a coach?
Yeah.
And can you?
Yeah, I was working with a coach on this exact dilemma. The mandate is a certain spelling program, and it's a challenging one to teach. It's a fabulous spelling program. It's what my kids learned. It's words their way. Anybody ever? You've used words their way, you understand how hard it is to use at the beginning. It becomes natural and easy as time goes on, but it's hard at the beginning. So here this coach is being steered towards helping everybody implement words their way. And I told her, when we had a little one-on-one, I was helping her, coaching the coach, and I said, don't do that. That's PD. We can do a lot of PD on how to do words their way. But a coach, and you can certainly work with teachers on goals around spelling, if you want, for that matter, But if she isolates her work to be complete program-based implementation of programs, we end up with people, you either have people who like the program, who don't like the program. So right there you have like half of the people who are PO'd at you, who don't want anything to do with it. So then you've set yourself back. Or you have very surface level, superficial kind of conversations with teachers, because it's all about the surface level implementation of something. So my
way is just focused directly on what the kids know, though. So it is a nice segue to get.
It's a great.
In that case, right?
Mhm.
It is centered around what words.
That's the thing. It's a great program,
Yeah.
but we don't coach to implement a program. I always say call the publisher for that, right? Because that's essentially PD. But it's hard because that happens again. I mean, it happened to me this week. So what we do typically is we try to help teachers reframe and set a goal that's more standards based and less related to a program, so that we can say we may pull out the Common Core language standards and set a goal, and then use words their way to get there, and then we'll work on that too, and then we can do both. But we want to be driven by something bigger and more important than a program. So I tend to push back on that. That's kind of the line in the sand for me, typically. That was a great question. Anyone else? Any new thinking on coaching? Hopefully you walked away going, hey, maybe that's a different angle. I haven't heard that angle in the past. Quiet. Come on, you guys. Anything else? Because I'm going to turn it over. Okay. Last call. I love it.
I'm thinking about, well, I have two questions, but I'm going to start with one specific to coaching. But that the difference between kind of informal coaches and formal coaches in a school setting, and that I'm assuming when you go and work with a school in a district, you're working with kind of who the formal coaches are, but that the coaching process that you're describing is there aren't boundaries in the way that necessarily it stops where the formal coach is.
Yeah.
So who do you see on a school level that becomes kind of informal coaches
Great question.
in a way that is just as powerful as potentially the formal
Yeah.
ones?
There's one of my go-to videos I've shown the folks here in Madison is of a team coaching each other. They're using these practices to say, what are our kids doing? What are we going to do next? Essentially, those are the two big questions we're driven from. So informal coaching conversations can become how we work. It can become how do we operate in the school. So whomever I'm speaking with and collaborating with, we're collaborating around those two big questions. How are our kids doing? What are we going to do next? What do they need to be doing? Those three questions, I guess. Somebody asked earlier about the difference between mentoring and this, because sometimes that can be a formal version of coaching also, and I would say mentoring is oftentimes geared towards just the functional nature of our work as teachers. So we have things like how to manage through a software system a district uses, or how to, who's going to be on the social committee, and you have all of that kind of stuff that's associated with mentoring. And so that piece is, I think, works adjacent, and it's an informal support system for teachers as well. But it typically isn't driven by student outcomes that are standards-based. So that's a different sort of parallel informal support system. Oftentimes I work with principals and suggest that they would say to a teacher in their school, what are you working on with your coach? Instead of saying, what are you learning with your coach? It would be, what's your goal for students? What are you working on with your coach related to your goal for students? So a principal can be informally coaching. So it's sort of, in a way, it's just bringing to life that idea of we are responsive to kids. All of our conversations are about that. It's all driven by really knowing our kids. And so the coach is the application I've used, but it's way bigger than that, I think, which is what you're getting at. Mm-hmm. Did you have a follow-up question? Or a second question?
Well, somewhat unrelated, but actually a follow-up to that is that, do you find that sometimes they're in conflict? Do you find sometimes kind of conflicting coaching messages coming to teachers from these various places that you're talking about?
Yes.
So then how do you manage, or how does a teacher manage?
A teacher deserves sort of to be able to trust in a coaching model in their building, and there's oftentimes a lot of fear associated because there's a lot of historical teacher fixing out there. Teachers have been burned if they've been in the profession, or they've had really weird conversations with coaches. If you've been a teacher, you maybe have had, he's back there nodding, like, what was that? Am I being evaluated? That was not helpful. And so I think there's a lot of mixed messages about coaching. So I suggest if you're gonna, implement student-centered coaching or something like that, you've got to do a full-blown PR campaign. What is this? Why does it benefit me as a teacher? How am I to engage? What's the expectation? What are the practices? And then we have to stay true and deliver on what we promise. So there's a lot of different interpretations. In fact, if you were to survey a school, any school, what do you think coaching is? And if you had indicators on the survey, and some of them were subtly like, it's to get, help me use certain instructional practices or to help me get better as a teacher. Those are the kind of things teachers think coaching is. And we're talking about that's part of what we do, but we are very much outcome-based for kids. And almost what I guess I'm saying is almost every teacher assumes coaching is just about them getting them to do certain things. So we have to reframe coaching as it's about partnering with you to meet your kids' goals. It's about partnering to move your students' learning forward. And that takes some time for people to believe in because they oftentimes have been burned in the past or have been in coaching situations where maybe they felt like they were not doing something right and it was targeting them in some uncomfortable way. So there's a lot out there already. I mean, coaching is essentially, you think about Reading First is when coaching went national in the US. And that was, I think it was when I was pregnant with my son. So it was like the mid 90s, right? Reading First was like, like 94? 94. So that's when coaching went mainstream. That's a lot of years to make a lot of mistakes and to kind of mess this up. And there's a lot of mess out there. That's why I have work, because there's a lot of stuff out there that has not been respectful to teachers. It hasn't been outcomes-based in the least. It hasn't made a bit of difference for kids, and sometimes even for the teachers. And so you have that world we're living in, and we have to build trust again around this. Make it mean something to people. Anything else?
So my question is, what qualifies coaches to be coaches? Because I think in a lot of our districts, I know here, there's a lot of different skill sets that go into coaching. So how are we training coaches to be the most effective coaches they can be?
Well, it's an interesting thing because I always joke that I think I got more training when I worked selling bathing suits when I lived in Southern California than I got when I was a coach. I literally, at least I got trained on how to use the cash register. That was my first job. But I think what we're trying to do, and this is a partnership we're doing, and I'll have Beth or Lisa share about this, we're trying to get on the front end of that. So what I do is I come in after people have been hired typically and try to help get them ready for the job. I think we have to have a certification, which is what we're partnering on, to get people ready for a coaching job before they're hired. A teacher has a certification. I think a coach should too. There is a very discrete skill set to being an effective coach. Everything from being nice to using questioning strategies appropriately, to being strategic, to being a good writer, to being able to know the content. I mean, the demands on a coach are vast and deep. And so it's really, I like to get my hands on hiring before people are in the jobs, and then I find it's easier. But oftentimes, I don't get that luxury in places I work. So do you want to share a little bit about the kind of segue to the certificate? Because I think that's an exciting answer to this dilemma, and I'm thinking it's going to be really cool.
So for those of you who are interested, we're going to be partnering with Diane, and we're offering 3 courses, and they'll be online courses, and it's going to be leading to a certificate in student-centered coaching. So starting this summer, we'll have an introduction to student-centered coaching. We'll be then going into a course into the fall for implementation, and then that 3rd course is going to be about advanced study into student-centered coaching and actually having coaches, typically they're going to be already within a school, but talking about how they're implementing that at their school and using the different strategies. And so Diane is partnering on that with us. And so we will have that out this summer, lots of information. And so that's really our attempt at getting this information out to coaches so they have the skill set in order to do the job that we're hoping that they do for our schools.
Any other questions? They're all in one place.
I have been sitting trying to think about how to articulate this, but with the focus on student needs being anchored in Common Core standards, I can understand and see the use of, kind of your description of the gap in learning, very useful. But I wonder also about how you help teachers think through things, especially when there are mandates coming through with lots of curriculum, kind of workbooky kinds of things. How do you help them think through things like how to catch your kids' attention and motivate them when it's not so much about the skill that you're teaching, but it's about the showmanship of teaching and,
Kind of Doug Lamont stuff, kind of in that category. It's interesting because we do sometimes set goals that are related to things like engagement or behavior. We sometimes do coaching cycles that are associated with those things. But we found that actually you can just build that right in. I mean, teaching and learning go hand in hand. So if we're working on a goal that's somewhat standards-based, like let's say problem solving and showing your work, I've got to build in engaging lessons to do that. So we just blend it right together into some sort of a nice messy package of conversation that's related to how are you going to engage kids, what are they going to be doing as learners, what's your lesson going to look like. And we sometimes we're trying to get better at being very articulate around what is the instruction going to look like through chunking out a lesson from the intro. If it's a secondary class, it may be what's your do now going to be to start the lesson, and then how are we going to involve technology, and so we talk at that level of pedagogy and instruction, which I think is some of the stuff you're thinking about. But sometimes we have a class that's got some major behavior issues, we may just set a goal around that. Like, how are we going to work with each other as kids, in this class? That could be a goal, is to collaborate as kids in the classroom. So it can be, you essentially go into the entry point based on what's most important to the teacher, because I can't set a goal for somebody. So we go through kind of what's the situation, what are we after, and then let's set a goal that feels right. So it's pretty diverse in what it looks like.
And then, so what data points do you use? Because you use student work.
For the management and engagement. We oftentimes just use descriptive data. So we'll say, if we're going after a goal that's something like, let's say, build kids accountable talk. We worked for years in Denver on accountable talk, and that's our goal. We want kids to really talk deeply with one another. We may just collect descriptive data around that. We may have checklists or a rubric for that, or we would do learning targets for accountable talk. What does that look like, and what's the evidence we're seeing? So it's not necessarily a test, really. It can be descriptive as well. So we just want to get at the heart of how are kids doing related to our goal. So whatever we can think of, we tend to do it in lots of creative ways in terms of knowing where our kids are. So lots of opportunities. The times when we can't do it is when a lesson is so kind of controlled by a teacher that there's no surfacing of what kids know. And I was in a lesson like that this week as well, where the kids actually didn't surface, and I couldn't tell what they knew because of how the instruction was. So then the next step would be, they did a lot of turn and talks, but they were superficial, and there just wasn't wasn't picking anything up. I couldn't really tell what the kids knew in relation to this goal to name some craft and text. And so what I did is I had to sit with the teacher and say, next time we've got to figure out ways to make learning more visible. Got to figure out ways to learn, to know better what kids know, because I got nothing from that, so it was sort of a loss. I was at a loss. So there are those times too, and we just have to regroup and plan ahead a little better. I have lots of videos. To be honest, some are better than others, but they're out there for the sake of learning, and there's little descriptions. There's a link, there's a YouTube page chock full of videos. There's a blog I have on this website, DianeSweeney.com. There's blogs written by guest writers I have that are practitioners in the field. There's all kinds of interesting links to things. So if you're interested at all, I would send you there for more information. I always laugh that she's the creeper in the website. She's always in there. Well, I know what's in there. So there's a lot constantly being added. So it's kind of meant to be a place to share content and to share whatever I have. So I share what I can there. So I thank you guys for coming. I know it's late and